EMP Series, Day 12. At 3 a.m., Linda and I were woken by a frantic Jolie. She told Linda that Catherine was getting worse. She was spiking a fever and sweating profusely and talking deliriously. Jolie asked for Linda's help, and the three of us went down to the infirmary. We took some fresh cold water from the tote outside and used towels soaked in it to pat Catherine down in an effort to bring her temperature down. Jolie told us she could wait no longer. The bullet must come out, and it must come out now. I held the rechargeable spotlight on her as she worked with Linda, assisting her. She went in after the bullet in Catherine's shoulder. To watch her, you could have never guessed that she wasn't a skilled surgeon, nevertheless, not even through with nursing school. She located fragments of the bullet, and she was able to remove them. She knew there were more, but couldn't find them among the bloody tissue and festering flesh that used to be Catherine's shoulder. With Linda's help, she kept the wound flushed out and continued to do the best she could. After about 2 hours of operating, Catherine went into shock. Jolie frantically tried everything she could think of, but at 5:48 a.m., Catherine succumbed. Jolie collapsed on the floor in tears. Linda turned to me and asked me to leave them alone. She sat down next to Jolie and held her in her arms, pulling her head into her chest. As I walked into the garage and put water on the wood stove for coffee, still with Catherine's blood on my shirt sleeves, Josh walked in. He looked at me and at the blood on my shirt. He must have known by the look on my face. He turned and ran outside. I went out after him and saw him with Aaron, who was coming down as he was going out. He looked at me and I just nodded. Aaron and Callie took Josh up to the house as Linda, Jolie, and I cleaned up the infirmary. Jolie was barely holding it together. Pastor was summoned and I left to find Greg, Richie, and Steve. We geared up to go check out the school, find out why they were radio silent for almost 24 hours. We walked quietly through the field and into the woods. It was a beautiful, cold, late fall morning. The sun was shining. I couldn't get Josh out of my mind. This poor kid who, in less than a week, lost his entire family. It made me think of my own son, so far away. Was he okay? What was he doing? We had to just keep moving forward. On school property, walking in our standard formation in the woods adjacent to the ball field, we noticed that it was strangely quiet. No traffic on the driveway, nobody walking around outside the school. We approached from the rear, up the hill, to our cover spot behind the dumpsters. Richie and I ran up to the chiller tower, through the fence where we cut it the other day. Greg and Steve remained behind the dumpsters for cover. Up the ladder and onto the roof we went, Richie first and me right after. We lifted the exhaust hood and looked into the gym. Nothing was there. Everything and everybody was gone. All the bunk beds, supplies, all the troops and the jeeps, everything just gone. We had heard rumors that the feds were turning Walmarts into huge FEMA camps. We had seen the videos on it long before the EMP even went off. Could this be where they took everyone? There was a very large and well-populated city just 30 miles south of here. Could they have relocated everyone to a larger, more centralized camp? We had no way of knowing. In any case, I believe that the fact they were gone was good for us, any way you looked at it. We entered the building through the boiler room. Our plan was to go through it and see if there were any supplies or materials worth salvaging. As we walked down the hall, past the gym, and up toward the classroom wing, We noticed it was eerily quiet. There wasn't much worth taking. When they left, the occupying force took everything of value. Well, almost everything. I remember Linda telling me that she used to have to hide coffee in a stockroom in a special ed kitchen. It would mysteriously disappear from the cupboard they kept it in. She was part of a team of staff that worked with the special needs students. They used to teach them life skills by making coffee and muffins or bagels every morning. They would sell them to the school staff to cover costs and raise a little money to buy the department things that they needed that the school budget couldn't afford to cover. The superintendent of the school district here made more than the governor of this state, but the special ed department had to buy its own crayons. I wondered briefly where our school chief was now. I almost started to allow myself to feel happy at the thought of her suffering in this current world we were thrust into. Oh, how the mighty hath fallen. I even started to smile at the thought of her frantic as she couldn't start her Lexus. It was easy in life to be vindictive and harshly judgmental. I had to remind myself, hourly some days, that everyone just needed Christ. Everyone was lost and on their way to hell without him. Until I trusted Christ into my heart and received his free gift of eternal salvation, I was lost and on my way to hell too. I had to kill the old man within me. I had to put on the new man, the man saved by God's grace. Life was too short, and so many needed salvation. There was no time to waste in bitterness and envy. There was no time to waste being judgmental and vindictive. As I walked along, I prayed silently for her and for everyone who needed Christ. As I entered the special ed department, I saw that it had been pretty well cleaned out. I walked into the storage room in back and pulled a chair up to the shelf against the wall. I stepped up and slid 2 boxes of holiday decorations to the side. There it was. 3 one-pound cans of generic store brand dark roast coffee. Score. Now, I didn't smoke, drink, or do drugs. But boy, oh boy, did I enjoy a nice cup of strong coffee. I almost wanted to secret it away and keep it for myself, away from the group. There I go, getting in my flesh again. No, I said, as I put myself in check. I would share it with my friends, just like we have all done since the beginning. I felt guilty for a brief moment as I put the coffee in my ruck. We walked back to the church and shared what we had seen at the school with the group. The women were preparing lunch, and Pastor was cutting and splitting firewood. Aaron said that since we were back, he was going to go out hunting. On Channel 2, he said, as he grabbed the walkie and headed for the trail. Greg followed them out, Mini 30 over his shoulder. We were all sitting in the garage eating lunch. The children had already been fed, and Chandler, Pastor's 3-year-old grandson, was playing on the floor over in the corner. The door to the tool room, which we used as a radio room, was just to his left. He started saying, "Mama, Mama," over and over. When I looked at him, he was pointing at the door. Pastor got up and went over to pick him up and comfort him, as he had done when any of the children called for their mom. As he approached, he heard her also. It was Jillian, his middle daughter. She was on the shortwave radio. "Can anyone hear me?" was all she repeated over and over. Pastor keyed the mic and replied, "Jillian? Is that you?" With a short pause, she answered him, "Dad?" with emotion filling her voice. Jillian was an administrator for a large hospital in the city, about 45 miles to the north. Her husband Benjamin was a cardiovascular surgeon there as well. They had met while working there some 10 years ago. They married 7 years ago, and their oldest daughter was now 4. Benjamin had been on call and was in the middle of a 36-hour shift when the EMP went off. Jillian was working as well. During those times when they both worked, Pastor and Sadie would watch the kids. Many times when visiting Pastor, he would have them in his office, playing on the floor with their toys as he worked. He always made a point to remember how God had blessed him with a job where he was able to spend time with his family. Pastor was the kind of guy who really truly loved everyone he met. He was definitely blessed by God. After the EMP went off, it was crazy at the hospital. The emergency generators wouldn't start because the electronic controls had been fried. They had battery backup on most life-critical equipment, but that only lasted several hours. In the first 2 days, they lost over 200 patients. The toll was over 800 now, and rising. Jillian was crying as she talked to her parents and her children. She said that she and another administrator were taking turns trying to raise someone on the radios. They were going up and down the bandwidth slowly and tediously, calling out for anyone who could hear. She told us that things were really bad at the hospital, and she was getting worried for her safety. When asked about Benjamin, her voice broke with sobbing as she told Pastor, He's gone, Daddy." Sadie started crying and then blurted out, "Come home, honey, come home." Jillian told them that she had stayed because Ben felt he was obligated to help do what he could for the patients there. And then, after he died, she didn't know where to go. She didn't know how or if she could even make it back home. Now, after hearing her children's voices, she knew she had to try. No matter what happened, she would try. Now, this whole section of the state played a big part in the Industrial Revolution with the production of brass. There were old brass mills in towns up and down this river valley from one end of the state to the next. Some had been torn down, and many were turned into shops and upscale loft housing. I heard Jillian ask Pastor, "How, Daddy, how? How can I get home?" There was an old rail line that ran along the river that had been used to move brass and raw materials for years, mostly being discontinued decades ago. In some of the more affluent areas, it had been turned into walking trails or bike paths. In the inner city, it was home to an underground urban subculture of drug addicts and derelicts. It did, however, run almost the entire state north to south. I keyed the mic and asked her, "Do you know where the train tracks are in reference to the hospital?" She answered, "Yes, I think so. There's a bike path about 3 blocks away. I think that's part of it." "Okay," I said, "when you get off the radio, grab what you can for food and water, put them in your backpack, and walk out. Don't tell anyone or say anything to anybody. Just walk out. Head for that bike path and go south." Pastor leaned into the mic and asked, "Do you have your gun, honey?" She said, "Yes, Daddy, it's in my purse." "Keep it close," Pastor told her. Greg leaned over his shoulder and said, "Sweetheart, make sure it's loaded. Pull the slide and put one in the chamber and slide it into your pocket. And honey, if you need to pull it out, do not hesitate. It's likely that they sure won't." Pastor said, "Be careful, baby." She replied, "I love you, Daddy. He started crying. I picked up the mic. "Jillian, leave now. We are on our way. We will find you. Just keep moving, no matter what." "Okay," she said. Then she paused. "I'm scared." Sadie was crying, and Pastor was emotional as well. I told her I knew that it was scary, but if she went now and did not stop, we would likely have her sometime tonight or early tomorrow. I reiterated what Greg had told her. I said, "Jill, keep that gun handy." I asked her if she had winter mittens. She said yes, she did. I told her to slide the gun into her glove, into the palm of her hand. I said, "When you pass someone, grip the gun and shoot it right through the mitten if you have to." I was with Benjamin when he bought her that gun, when she first got her concealed carry permit. He purchased her a Ruger LC9. It was a subcompact 9mm with a green laser. He reasoned that if she needed to pull it and shoot quickly, the laser would allow her to not have to take the time to aim down the sight. It came with a little holster that fit in your pocket, and it had a magnet in it. When you pull the gun out and clear the magnet, the laser came on automatically. It was a nice little gun. She told us she would do it, and signed off. We scrambled. Linda already had my pack loaded with some granola bars and bottled water. She put in a change of clothes and an extra hoodie. We had enough supplies for a couple days, just in case. Steve, Richie, and I loaded up our weapons, and they put together a bag of supplies each, and we headed for the power wagon. We radioed Aaron and Greg to get back right away, as we had an emergency. Pastor came out with his bag and the Mossberg strapped over his shoulder as well. He said he was coming. Aaron had Josh to help him with camp security. Lee put together a bag for Greg, and when he and Aaron got back into camp, we filled them in quickly. Greg hopped in the power wagon, and we took off. We left to recover Jillian at 1:30 p.m. Normally, it was about an hour ride straight up the highway. The train tracks were in the valley adjacent to the old state road that ran north to south. It had been mostly abandoned when the highway was built in the late 60s, except for little sections here and there that were still used, but were mostly overgrown. Nothing more than a wide trail, really, now, with cracked asphalt for a base. We decided that this would be the best route for us to take. There were a couple places along the route where the road had been completely removed to make way for building construction or the like. The Kmart just north of town was an example. In these places, we would have to go around, sometimes maybe even having to jump on the highway for a short length of the trip. When Jillian got off the radio, she went into the staff lounge, grabbed her bag, and put 2 bottled waters in it, as well as a bag of goldfish crackers and an apple. She took the mittens from her backpack, chambered around in the LC9, and slid her mitten on over it. She headed for the door, almost running. When she was outside, she went straight for the bike trail and headed south. While making our way north in a route to connect us to the old state road, Pastor told us that he had some familiarity with the bike path. When Benjamin and Jillian would work long shifts together, he and Sadie would take the kids down to see them, often having picnic lunches on that bike trail. He said he didn't know exactly how long it was, but he did believe it to be at least 10 miles, which was where it came out into the next town south of the hospital. That would put that town approximately 30 to 35 miles north of our position. It took us about 3 hours to get into the town of Little Falls. The route was pretty deserted, although we did find several encampments along the road with little activity in them and no threat to us. We only had to get on the highway for 2 miles to get around a newer condo development that was built on a lot that the old tracks ran through. We had a choice of diverting down a main road through the area or up onto the highway. We decided the highway would be the best bet for avoiding people. It also ended up being the slowest 2 miles of the trip, having to weave around all the abandoned disabled vehicles. We got to where the tracks turned into the bike trail, going north out of Little Falls. Now Jillian was a runner in college, and actually broke a few university records in her time there. We put the hospital up north at about 13 miles from where we were. There was a chance she could have been further down south the line if she ran. If not, she should be coming up to our current position pretty soon. Even at just a brisk walking pace, we figured she could do a 20-minute mile pretty consistently. She was in excellent shape and scared. I didn't envision her stopping for too many breaks, or even slowing down from a jog much. We looked north up the trail and south down the tracks into town. I looked at Greg and he just shrugged his shoulders. Pastor said confidently, "Go north toward the hospital." North we went. We drove the power wagon right down the bike trail. About a mile or so later we came to a bridge where the trail crossed the river. It was about 70 feet above the water and too narrow for the truck. As we got out and started to walk across it, we saw a figure approaching from the other side. We couldn't see the face, but judging from the size and pace, I thought it could be Jillian. Just as she were about to walk over the bridge, a larger man called out from behind her to stop. She turned and looked at him, but did not stop. He started running after her. He had something in his hand, a pipe or a stick maybe. I couldn't quite make it out. It was a little after dusk, almost completely dark. The man was taunting her and yelling at her and laughing, telling her she wasn't going to outrun him. He laughed and said, "You're all mine, little lady." She had about 300 yards to reach us, and Steve and Richie started running toward her. I looked at Pastor and said, "I think she can outrun him." Greg mumbled something and grabbed the .308 out of the truck. He lifted it to his eye, fired once. Jillian started screaming, but just kept running. The man dropped on the trail and didn't move. Greg said, "Yep, you were right. She did outrun him," as he put the rifle back in the truck. Jillian reached Richie and Steve a few moments later and broke down crying. Pastor ran up and grabbed her in his arms. "It's okay, honey. You're okay. Everything is going to be fine." Steve jumped in the driver's seat. Pastor rode shotgun with his daughter in the middle. He had his arms around her, pulling her close. Greg, Richie, and I rode in the back. We headed for home.